Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 5, Episode 21, which is the Season 5 finale. Finally, we are at the finale. And oh boy, is it going to be the cliffhangeriest. It's not really actually going to be anything like that. I was thinking of doing something, big and special to celebrate Season 5 wrapping up. And I didn't want to because one of the things I hate most in the world or am most uncomfortable with is goodbyes. And this is not a goodbye, it's a pause because, this ends, I'm going to take a break and then we'll come back for Season 6. But it's like, we're wrapping something up. It sort of feels like we're moving from one grade to the next grade kind of a thing. And it's, I just don't like goodbyes and whatnot. So on the other hand, I have like a whole bunch of stuff that I want to update you on that is kind of like, oh my gosh, I have so many things I want to cover and we don't have time to cover them all. So that's what we're going to do today, which I think will be really fun. We get to kind of like nerd out and geek out on some stuff. It's going to be quite a visual episode, but of course, still totally listenable to the audio only version. But if you want to see some of the things I'm talking about or see some of the clips that I'm sharing or whatever, you can always do that through YouTube channel memberships and Patreon. And so first and foremost, you probably won't be able to hear this, but if you see me moving my hand a little weird today, I'm left-handed and my left thumb got in a bit of an accident last week, and I also along with it because I'm attached to the thumb. Last week was Thanksgiving in the United States, and Heather and I don't do anything big or extravagant for Thanksgiving. But right as we were like, it was like the end of the day, it was like 4:00-ish, and we were sitting down to eat. And I, last summer, got into baking sourdough bread, which has been super fun. And I had a loaf of sourdough, and we got like this really nice bread knife. You see where I'm going with this. And I thought, wow, it would be great to have a piece of bread with this food that we're going to eat. And so I was just cutting a piece of bread, but like my most recent loaves weren't my best loaves, and they were a little dense. And as I was trying to cut it, it was like really hard to do something. And then I looked away for a second. My left hand was holding the loaf, knife was slicing, and if you're squeamish, I'm sorry, but I could feel it cutting into my hand like the way you would normally feel it cutting into the loaf of bread. And that was awful. And so immediately pain everywhere. And I just sort of like dropped and held it and let out a bunch of expletives and thought like, maybe it's not that bad. It was that bad. And the cool thing is, so we've talked about living in the United States, healthcare is just a nightmare. Needing to go to the emergency room is kind of one of the, the worst things that can happen to you because it can destroy you. On Thanksgiving, most places are closed anyway, but the few urgent cares, which an urgent care would usually be a cheaper place or, to go to get some urgent care you need urgently, they all closed at 4 p.m. and I injured myself literally at like 3:58 p.m. So by the time I injured myself, we figured out what happened. We decided we needed professional help because we could not take care of it ourselves. Everywhere was closed except the emergency room. So off to the emergency room we went on Thanksgiving night, and fortunately, haven't gotten a bill for that yet, but at least the experience itself was only 90 minutes. It wasn't anything too crazy. They did say, though, which was fascinating, that specific day, that specific Thanksgiving, this emergency room had seen more cuts and lacerations than any single day prior, like ever. I think I was like the 26th case of somebody cutting or injuring themselves, which is terrifying. And they said some of them were really bad. Like they were like, at least your finger is still attached and stuff. So that was really a big bummer. But fortunately, they said they were going to do stitches. And then I asked would it be possible to do the glue instead of stitches? Because I've only had stitches once in my life, and it was for a surgery, but I was like asleep when they did the stitches, and then they were the dissolving stitches, so I never had to get them out. And I know little kids get stitches. I know it would be okay. I didn't want stitches. And they said, yeah, the way the cut is and everything's kind of like pressed together, the glue will probably work. And so they, cleaned it, disinfected, examined it, glued it, gave me a tetanus shot, and sent me on my way. But that's the second time in my life that that this sort of thing has happened. If you hear a little chime in the background, it is our washing machine. That's the song that it sings when it's over. And it's right across the hall from my room. But anyway, 10 years ago, I split my nose open. And when I say split my nose open, I mean, like, how your nostrils, like the skin to the middle of your nose to your nostril is like attached? Mine wasn't. You could just sort of lift up and look inside the nostril, which also, sorry if you're squeamish, that was terrible. And I had to go to the emergency room for that. And it was sort of the same thing where they were like, well, we could do stitches. And I was like, is there any way not to do stitches? And the doctor said, well, we could also do glue. And I said, okay, what's the glue like? And she's like, well, the glue will leave less of a scar. It heals faster and it's less painful. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Why is that option 2? Why is that not the first option? Like, I know there are certain injuries where you need the strength of stitches to keep things together so they can heal. But if I hadn't asked for the glue, they would have just done the stitches, which would have been, in her own words, more painful, left more of a scar, and took longer to heal. Why was the glue, which is virtually painless? It stings a little bit when it sets, and after that, it's fine. And it's like waterproof and stuff. Why was that option number 2? And so I knew better this time. When they said, like, yeah, we'll do some stitches, that's when I was like, what about the glue? And they're like, yeah, we could do the glue. So emergency room doctor, I know that, like, again, you're the doctors. There are times when you need stitches. When it's possible, the glue should be option number 1. Just anyway, I'm going to stick to that point. So anyway, my thumb, it feels a lot better now. You can probably just see there's like a discoloration on it there where there's a nice big slice through it. But the weird thing with the glue is you can't like wrap it or cover it. Anyway, it's been like a week now, so it's feeling a lot better, and I can move it and kind of start to use it a little bit. It only hurts sometimes, which is great. And ultimately, speaking of Thanksgiving, I'm thankful that it wasn't worse, because it could have been a lot worse. So that was a long way to tell you my Thanksgiving horror story, but also to explain if you see me like using my hand in a weird way today, that would be why. All right, so we got some updates. We got a lot to talk about. I wanted to really dive into something super cool that I'm going to share with you first, and then I also want to talk about some moves that have happened since the last episode, based on what we talked about in the last episode. Yesterday, I sold my Canon EOS R and ordered a Sony FX3, which is, in my world of camera stuff, is a little like, is up still up or is down still down? Like, is the ground cold, kind of a situation. So we're going to talk about that later, but we're also going to talk about, and we'll talk about season 6 and what's happening at the end of season 5. But before that, I wanted to jump into something that we talked about last week that I just didn't really have the ability to showcase fully last week. And that is, speaking of new Sony cameras that were purchased, I mentioned last week I bought the most expensive Sony camera ever, which was the total kit, $20,000 to $30,000. I know that's a big gap, but I don't really know. It's hard to find pricing info. So here we go. What I'm putting on the desk right now is the body of my Sony DSR 390, which is an ENG, electronic news gathering camera. And this is sort of funny because I just mentioned the FX3, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But one of the things about the FX3 is that it's a gray camera. It's a great camera, but it's also a gray camera. Like, the color of the body is gray, and most cameras are black. And it's sort of a thing with Sony's cinema line is that they're gray. And I know, like, the look of a camera, you should not, it's like a microphone. You shouldn't focus on what it looks like, focus on what it sounds like. Camera, you should focus on how it performs, not what it looks like. But I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, gray camera, black camera, that's crazy, how insane. And then looking at this camera, I was like, oh, This is a Sony professional camera from 2003, and it is the exact same color as like the FX3 and the FX series, Sony Cinema series cameras. So they've been using this for a long time. But this is, I said it's a $20,000 to $30,000 camera. That was when it was new in 2003. It is, I got it for $400 on eBay, but it's in perfect working condition. And there's like a diagnostics inside of this that you can check like how long they've been running and everything. This only has like 400 hours of use on it total in its lifetime. And I think only 150 of those hours are actually the tape running. So, it's been on, but it hasn't been recording kind of thing, which is, it doesn't need its first bit of maintenance until the tape has been running for 1,500 hours. And the tape's only been running for like 130 hours since 2003. So we got time. It means it's like 6% through its point of life to its first service thing. Works great. I'll be able to show you some images from this, but I really wanted to share some stuff with you about this because as I've been talking about cameras, the thing about this camera and what it's done for me lately is it's really like, it's a fun camera to use. I love ENG style cameras. I always have, and being able to now spend as much time as I want with one has been kind of amazing. And there's so many things on here that it's like a combination of forcing you to learn how to do stuff and like really, it's almost like when I had that Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, and it was like, oh, it's, you kind of have to work at it a little more than a fully auto camera, but you get like, I don't know, it's kind of fun and you can get really cool results. And even though this camera is 20 years old almost, a basic ENG style camera, even a current one that shoots like 4K and, to digital memory and all that kind of stuff, the form factor, the body, a lot of the functionality is basically the same because what's really cool with these is this is a Sony one, but if you got a Panasonic or a JVC or whatever other brand you might want to get, most of the controls are still in the exact same spots because there's no time to, if you're a TV news station or a production company, there's no time to retrain everyone. Hey, we switched to Sony from Panasonic. So now everybody, let's have a meeting and show you where the white balance button is. Like, that's just not how those things work. And so they're all kind of uniform and they've been that way for decades. And it's easy to think like, oh, well, that's outdated. Why would in 2021, almost 2022 now, why would we be doing the same thing that was started in like, the 80s or the 70s and the 90s, whatever? I know it's a lot of years, but there's a reason. Like, it just works and there's a lot of practicality. And what you notice when you build up a camera like this or use a camera like this is you start to see when people do take their mirrorless cameras or their DSLRs and they start to like rig them out and make them look all big and stuff, which can be fun for sure, and practical. It's still not as functional as this. Like, this is a tried and true design for many reasons. So I'm going to build up the camera with you just so if you've ever wondered, if you've ever seen like a TV news person with their camera and you're like, why is that camera so big? Why does it look that way? Now you can know, and now I can kind of tell you about it. So there's a lot of things about this camera here. So if you're listening to this, it's sort of like a big rectangle. It looks like a VCR with a handle on the front, like I'm holding it vertically. It's a very it looks like an old piece of video gear, but it's all metal. It's like super well built. It's very, very heavy. On the bottom, there's a big cushy pad for your shoulder because this is supposed to go on your shoulder. And then, well, here I have my phone so I can show you some close-ups of things. On the left side of the camera, so this is the side of the camera that would go by your head, you have sort of like some, and this is, again, basically how these cameras still are to this day. You've got a screen that gives you all your info. You've got some basic controls. You've got little covers for everything. You've got a door that opens up and you have like a bevy of audio controls and some video controls. You can do skin tones and all that kind of stuff. And this door, which is metal, is just held together with a magnet. So it's super strong. You've got your audio controls. You've got little windows that open up so you can adjust stuff without having to open the full door, because also this side will be pushed up against your head. You've got a little speaker right here to monitor what you're listening to, and that just happens to be right next to your ear when your ear's up against the camera. My favorite part of an ENG camera is on the front corner. They pretty much all have this. Even current cameras, like if you look at the Sony FX3, it's where it starts to introduce some of these controls. but they have this little shelf here that has just physical switches, like little switches for certain things, and they're pretty much all the same. There's gain, which is sort of like your brightness. This one has an output, white balance, and then your menu controls, and you've got like your on-off switch is literally just a switch that flips the front of the camera. You've got some connectors for like an XLR mic, the viewfinder. You've got the part for the sensor itself, and you have this big dial here that turns built-in filters. Not only does it have built-in ND filters, but it also has built-in color filters. So it has 4 different filters. Some of them are daylight balanced, some of them are incandescent balanced, and this is a 2/3 inch sensor, so it's not like a full frame camera or anything. You have more controls here in the front, like there's a record button, that's where you can do your white balance. There's some audio. There's like multiple ways to adjust the controls for everything. The exterior side of the camera has all the outputs and where you would load the tape, and the back of the camera is where you can put the battery. You can plug in XLR stuff. It has phantom power. You can run all these different outputs, and the top of the camera is where you would have like your playback controls, and there's also tally lights. So speaking of the FX3, which has tally lamps, this camera has multiple tally lights, and they just have physical switches next to them, which lets you decide if you want the tally light to be on when it's recording or not. I love all that. It's super cool. That's just the body of the camera. So it does run on V-mount batteries, which this was finally a great excuse for me to get some V-mount batteries. It came with a couple, but they were 20 years old almost, and they were totally dead. So V-mount battery, just a big, super powerful battery. It's kind of a universal power source. They last a really long time. Once you've got a V-mount battery on, then I can flip the camera on, and you'll see like the screen illuminates over here. The camera's on. There's no lens or viewfinder attached right now, but the camera's still on. It's still working. I can push the eject button and it ejects the tape. The reason I wanted this model specifically is because it does something really cool. As I bend over and try not to hurt my thumb while doing so, it takes these tapes here, which are DVC Pro. I don't know if you heard the dog groan from under the door. These are like, if what I'm holding up is sort of like size-wise, it's in between. It's like bigger than an 8mm tape, smaller than a VHS tape, bigger than a mini DV tape, but it's a DV cam tape. And these are what like pros would use when they're using this camera, and that will fit in here. But this one also takes mini DV tapes, which were like the consumer level things, the really tiny tapes. As soon as you put that in, it will fit in this same slot, and then the playheads will like automatically move and shift to accommodate this small tape. It's super cool, like really versatile. I wanted that because I have a bunch of mini DV tapes. I've been talking about the Canon XL1 for a long time, and that takes mini DV tapes. And speaking of the XL1, which I have with me right here, I have been looking at the XL1 through the lens, no pun intended, of like a precursor to modern cinema cameras, because it's an interchangeable lens camera that was designed for like independent filmmaking, commercial work, that sort of thing. And it really is in a lot of ways. But diving into the world of ENG cameras, I've really come to see that the XL1 takes a lot of cues from takes a lot of cues from ENG cameras and ENG design, and it's very, very interesting to me. So it's caused me to kind of reevaluate how I look at this camera. Now, let's talk about the next thing here. So if you have this camera and you want to look at it, one big difference is that modern ENG cameras will have screens, nice little touch screens and stuff. But they also have a big fat viewfinder. This one has a big viewfinder. It's black and white. You can detach the viewfinder from these cameras. So you could, sorry, I hit the mic. You could connect to different ones. So in theory, maybe I could even get a color viewfinder and put it on here. I was actually kind of surprised that this camera from 2003 had a black and white viewfinder. I would have expected that it had a color viewfinder because even older cameras did. I'm guessing there's something in the like professional world where color viewfinders weren't as accurate or as trustworthy or something at the time, and you needed something tried and true. But basically, you've got your camera, and then the viewfinder, there's like a rail. Well, the viewfinder itself has a big fat eyepiece, which is crazy, and you can just flip it up, and then you can see the actual like viewfinder screen in there. So if you don't want to put your eye to it, and the camera doesn't have its own flip out screen, you can flip up the viewfinder and see the screen inside from far away. The front of the viewfinder has a tally light and also some more toggles. You have your view controls for the viewfinder, so you can adjust the brightness, the contrast, how intense the focus peaking is, because this is a fully manual focus camera. You can turn on your tally light, turn it off. You can turn on, the display info on or off. And then there's also a microphone holder right here. So there's a connector on the front of the camera, and this just sort of slides in here. And I knew where I needed it for me. It was right about here. And everything is like it feels like you're, have you ever seen like Apollo 13 when they're like getting their space suits ready and they're connecting everything? This is what it feels like when you're connecting parts of these cameras. It's all very it's just all very high quality and secure. And then you just plug in your viewfinder, and now you've got your viewfinder connected. So when you hold the camera, it's there, but there's no handle on the side. Like there's a handle on the top, but there's no handle on the side. So how do I get a handle on this? Well, this is probably the main reason I really even wanted to share this with you. And that is through this right here, which is the lens of the camera. So if you ever wondered why ENG cameras are expensive, a lot of it comes down to the lens. And the cool thing is, this lens is still really good. This camera is a standard definition camera. It's a 4:3 aspect ratio. But you'll see when I show you some sample shots later, so much of it has to do with the lens. If you watch my Canon L1 video from a couple weeks ago, even though that is just an 8mm camcorder, once I put a nice prime lens on it, the image quality was not too bad. And so the lens plays so much into this. And with ENG cameras, the lens is its own separate thing. The lens has the handle built into it with the zoom rocker and everything and a record switch. So that's a Sony camera. This is a Fujinon lens. A lot of times you'll see Sony cameras come with Canon lenses. So it's so strange when you get into the broadcast world, speaking of Sony and Canon, that's where you stop to see so much differentiation, and you start to see literally in the instruction manual for this camera, there's pages and pages about how to use Canon lenses. And it's not like an inferior, well, if you must use a different lens, it's no, that you're probably going to use a Canon lens or Fujinon lens because those are the most common ENG lenses. So here's how you use them with this camera. But these lenses, oh my gosh, this is an interchangeable lens camera, but you probably never need to change out your lens. You're not going to be, if you think of a news photographer, they're not going to okay, we're at this, breaking news situation. Let me decide which lens to put on my camera right now. They just need one lens that's going to do everything. And so it is a 2/3 inch sensor, which is a very small sensor. And the reason I'm saying that is because the focal length on this lens is, I always forget what it is. It is, 7.3 millimeters to 117 millimeters, but that's on not a full frame, nowhere near a full frame sensor. So the 7.3 is not as wide. It probably comes out to I know there's math you could do, but it feels like it's probably about a 20 millimeter full frame, and 117. I'm not entirely sure where that would be. Almost maybe closer to 200, 180 millimeters, something like that. But it's got a constant f1.8 aperture, which the aperture can be manual or automatic. It has automatic zoom built in, or there's a big clunky, not clunky, but a really nice solid clunky switch on the bottom that will let you either manually zoom it or digitally zoom it. And it is fully manual focus. So there's a giant focus ring. Basically, if you just grab anywhere near the front of the lens, you're going to be able to focus it. But also, it has a macro setting, and it can do some super cool macro stuff. I'll show you that. And it has this little adjuster where you can fine tune it so that it's almost like if you've ever bought a Sigma lens and you've purchased the dock for a Sigma lens, and then you go in and you kind of adjust the front focus and the back focus through that. It's you can do that same thing, because sometimes just different lenses and different cameras, even the same models, just slight differences in their production, you might need to fine tune things, and you can do that with this. And so these lenses, this one I think is old enough, I guess, where it's not still commanding a high price. But a lot of times you'll find people with these cameras, they will sell the camera body for really cheap because it's old, and they'll sell the lens for a lot of money, because when these lenses are new, they can be, $10,000 to $20,000 by themselves. I don't think this one was quite there, but they're really cool. So the attachment of the lens is pretty much the same as with any modern camera. You just pop it into the front here. There's a big metal, I guess I have my phone here, I can show you. And that is, showing is always better than telling when possible. So there's like a little metal lock here that you take out, and then you can remove the cap, and then the lens just snaps, well, not snaps right in. You sort of set it in, and then very much like an Apollo spacesuit, an Apollo era spacesuit, you just slide this little lock down. I don't mean to say the word lockdown in 2021. We're all sensitive to that now. Oi, it's hard to do with one hand while filming. Talk amongst yourselves while Tom struggles with his camera. Come on, buddy. I swear I've done this many times. It's just that no one has ever watched me do it. All right, there we go. I think it was my performance anxiety kicking in there. Now we've got what probably looks more familiar to you if you've ever seen a news photographer. I have big headphones on, so I can't put my head up against this. But now we've got like our fully built, spec'd out news camera right here, and let's connect it so you can see some stuff through it, because through the side here we've got all kinds of ports. We've got S-video, not SDI, but like SDI type connectors. We've got all kinds of RCA ports, monitor outputs. There's no shortage of like options and ways to do things with this camera, which is very cool. As I mentioned, it is a 4:3 aspect ratio. So wait a minute. Oh, I went to the wrong thing here. So if I go here, something is happening visually. I just need to change the camera source here. Boom. There we go. Now you can see. I love that this camera can output bars, not like a rap song or anything, but like the color bars so you can adjust things. And then when you take those off, I turned the camera off instead of taking the bars off. I got scared. I was like, oh, the whole thing broke for a second. It did not. We can just go back to camera. And you can click on the not auto zoom, but power zoom. Boom, there we go. It's on a sort of like a weird version of a 16:9 thing here. But if I pop this up on my shoulder, you can sort of see, like the aspect ratio is very strange on Ecamm over here, but I can zoom in very far. I can focus on stuff. If I flip on the manual zoom, then I can do like the Wayne's World whoa effect. It's pretty cool. And then I've got my whole camera right here, and I can press record. There's a whole bunch of other things. I don't want to bore everyone too much, but it's very exciting. My white balance is not set correctly either on this right now, but it's super fun. So we're gonna be using. Oh wow, it got real green real quick here. Let me see if I can play around with some white balance. This is white over here. Oops. What am I doing wrong? I know how to use things. There we go. I think our white balance is a little bit better now. Yeah, so there we go. Oh, and the macro. Let me show you the macro stuff. So right now, if I'm trying to the camera is, where are we? Oh my goodness. There's so many. You'll forgive me for these technical gaffes, right? So the camera is right up against the mic arm here. But if I go here and flip it into macro mode, because I can't focus on that, but if I turn on macro and make some adjustments, now it comes right into focus, and you can see every thread on this mic boom arm right here. And it's almost like the macro adjustment becomes your focus ring in a weird way. But it is pretty neat. Literally, the lens hood is like bumped up against my microphone boom arm, and you can see every thread of where there used to be a Rode logo, and there is no longer a Rode logo there because I removed it. So that has been my pet project for a while. This camera here, I'm not entirely sure what I'm even going to use it for. It's not like I have to make a video about it, but it's definitely going to be popping up throughout my channel. And it's just a lot of fun sort of giving you the crash course here. But it does also remind me of a story that I did not tell you last week from my time working at the TV station, which I don't know how TV news works nowadays exactly because I haven't worked in it for so long. I think it's much less common now to have a dedicated photographer and a reporter. Oh, I realized I didn't talk about audio. There's no microphone here. This camera did come with a Sony condenser mic that plugs right into an XLR port in the front here. And this is actually the same one. Like if you buy the top handle for the A7S3, not the top handle, but the XLR thing, and it comes with a little mic, this is actually that exact same mic. It's been around for a long time. But I have also been connecting the Deity S Mic 2 just to have some fun and play with some comparisons. And so there's a little mic slot right on the front of the camera here. And then you can there's also little clips all throughout it where you can like cable manage things. So you don't just have your cables hanging out sloppily and getting in the way. You can clip everything in, and now I've got a big XLR mic here. And then I've still got 2 XLR ports on the back. There's accessory shoes. You can mount a monitor on here, all kinds of fun stuff. So, but what I was saying is I think it's much less common now to have a dedicated photographer and a reporter. From what I've seen, at least in our area, which is not like a huge television market, is a lot of the reporters are also their own camera people. So a lot of times you'll see someone who's dressed in really nice clothes with like makeup and hair done because they're going to be on TV, but they're also lugging like a big tripod. They're not usually using these cameras. They're usually using like the smaller, like more camcorder-y kind of cameras, which I guess are good enough. I'm sure though that the bigger stations and the bigger markets and stuff still have more traditional expensive ENG cameras and maybe the photographer reporter setup. But as I mentioned last week, I started working at a TV station in 2001. I worked there through 2006, through the beginning of 2006. And my first year and a half-ish there, maybe a little beyond that, was really the most time that I spent going out into the world with photographers and reporters. And it's fascinating. Like you learn a lot and you have a lot of fun. You get to use these cameras a lot. I have a really ridiculous story that I'll share in a second. But you never know. And I don't mean this necessarily in a good way. You never know what your day is going to be because you could literally, you walk into work and an hour later you could find yourself at like a cat parade or something. Like, okay, I will film the cats in costumes and talk to all these people who put their cats in a parade. And then you could find yourself at like a murder scene. And you have these days that just sort of like whiplash you back and forth between all kinds of different stuff. And there's, at least in my experience, there's not really much in place to like, regardless of what you go out to do as the photographer, you're just expected to go back to the station, get your footage in, edit stuff, put it out. Like it doesn't, like it's almost irrelevant what you have gone out and seen and experienced throughout the day. And fortunately, in my time going out, especially because I was young, for most of it, I was like still in high school, I didn't experience anything too bad. There's definitely people who do not like you, and as soon as they see a news truck or a news camera, they will start, shouting and throwing things, and that definitely experienced that kind of stuff. But there were times we were in situations where like there was a shooting here, and we're here before the police. That's cool. I'm 16. I remember a specific time where we were following a trail of blood to see where it went. Not usually something that you want to do. And filming lots of fires and stuff, and just weird things like that. Which that was about as like brutal as my experience was. But I recently, this past summer, was able to meet up with one of the really, really good photographers that I worked with, or interned with, I should say. We hadn't seen each other in 20 years. We reconnected kind of by accident online, and he lives like across the country now, but just happened to be out back in this area like a week after I randomly sent an email. And he's like, we should meet up. So we did, and we talked about, we just sort of like shared stories and things. And he was telling me he worked in TV news up until right before COVID hit and had to stop because he was just getting so burnt out. And one of the big reasons I quit and decided I didn't want to work in TV news aside from it being super stressful because it's 24/7, 365, it never ends. And most of what you see is negative because that's what gets views, even though we're not necessarily talking about the internet. And I think I've told this story on this podcast before, but one day I was interning on a Saturday, and it was a really slow Saturday. And basically the way the TV station worked at the time was there was an assignment editor. So it's like a person sitting on a desk that's like at the big front of the newsroom where all the computers and things are. I'm sure you've seen what a newsroom looks like. Just picture like any generic newsroom. It's like a bullpen with a whole bunch of computers and desks and stuff. And there's a desk sort of at the front, like overlooking all that. And that's the assignment editor. They were the ones who were choosing, kind of like organizing the shows, putting things together, scheduling photographers. They're like figuring out what's going to be in everything. And then the photographers, reporters, and producers would film, write, edit, produce the actual stuff for the news. And one of the things the assignment editors did at this time was they just had a whole wall of police and emergency scanners that they would just be listening to all the time. So if there was something big that happened and the police or the fire or whatever were talking about it, they could hear it, they know where it was, and they'd get out there really, really quick to cover it. And one of the things I had to do as an intern my first summer, I didn't have to do this the second time, thank goodness, but the first couple months that I ever worked there, I had to do something called a beat check, which every hour I had a whole list of like 15 different numbers I had to call that were all the different police departments, fire departments, whatever's. And I would literally have to be like, hi, this is Tom from like blah, blah, blah station. I'm just calling to see if, what's up? Is there anything happening? And like, nope, all quiet over here. Okay, thank you. And every hour I just have to do that. I hate cold calling people. I hate asking people I don't know for things. I hate talking on the phone for the most part. So this was a nightmare, and I had to do it like 8 times a day for months. But anyway, this was one Saturday. I wasn't doing that. I was actually kind of like on a break and just sort of browsing the internet in the newsroom. Saturdays are typically very slow. And this was a very slow Saturday. There was like nothing happening. It was starting to be like 10 or 11 o'clock. We didn't have a midday news on Saturday. We didn't have a first broadcast until 5 p.m. on Saturday. And the assignment editor was starting to stress out because there literally was no news. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but the news, even when nothing bad has happened or nothing whatever, they don't like start the show and say like, hey, everybody, like today was a pretty good day. Like nothing crazy happened in our community. Let's watch an old rerun of, I don't know, X-Files or something. That usually just doesn't happen. And so the assignment editor was starting to stress out a little bit, and suddenly over the police scanners, we heard the sounds of an emergency. It's like these certain tones that would happen that you could tell like, oh, this is like the alert that something has happened. And then a voice came over that said like there had been a multi-car collision with multiple fatalities. I think 10 vehicles involved on like the freeway nearby. Basically a huge accident, people dying, every bad thing you could think of happening here. And the assignment editor, who was a very nice guy, he just went, yes, and like, fist in the air, like in Home Alone when Kevin defeats the burglars, and he's like, yes, that was the gesture that this guy did. And at that point I was like, I think I'm done here because I don't like this at all. And I know like that guy, the reason I said he's a really nice guy is because he wasn't happy that people had died, but he had been anxious and nervous about like he has to produce a show or help a show get formed, and that's not happening today. Now this thing happened. Now he knows, okay, he like has a job to do. He needs to send this person here, do this, plan this, organize this, like his tasks for the day are done, and he's going to be able to do his job. But I didn't like being in a situation where bad things happening meant it was good for us. And so that was pretty much like, I don't remember how long it was after I left, but very, very quickly after that, I stopped working at the TV station. And the reason I bring that up is because when I was talking to the photographer that I worked with, he said that he had to go through like, he basically had PTSD from the job because over the years, it's starting from, being very young in his early 20s to now in like his early 40s throughout his whole career, the number of like, gruesome, horrible things, the acts of violence, dead bodies, gore, body parts, like really terrible stuff that's, you would expect like an emergency worker or a soldier or something to see. Just a person who likes using cameras gets exposed to very regularly, like multiple times a week. These things happen for years on end, and it's traumatizing, and there's nothing in place for the most part to deal with it. Like, you just go back to the station. It's like, did you get the footage for the thing? Okay, yeah, okay. And then you go home, and then you come back the next day and it just starts all over, and just do that day in and day out. And it's grueling. So I just think of that if you do happen to find yourself working with not working with, but encountering a TV news reporter or photographer or something, that their job is super weird, and emotionally it can be crazy, and there might always be a little bit on edge. And a lot of times, especially on the photographer front, they got into it because they really love photography and videography and using cameras and video production and that kind of stuff. And this was like an outlet to do that professionally, but now it's exposed them to these terrible things, and it's traumatizing and scary. Anyway, transition. So this is my current newest Sony camera, but it won't be the newest Sony camera for long. That is a good transition, because let's talk about the meat of this 41 minutes later. Selling my EOS R. I'm going to put this camera out of the way here. Selling my EOS R. Now, I do still have an EOS R, because as you probably remember, I got two of them. Last year, I ended up buying I bought one several years ago, and I loved it so much, and it was such a good camera. It was so reliable, and the image quality was great, that last year I bought a second one, and we went through the whole the whole process is documented in past episodes of this podcast. And basically, it was having the two camera workflow really changed things for me. Like, it really is. I can't go back to not doing that, as spoiled as that sounds. And having two of the same camera was incredibly helpful, because they matched perfectly. Every button was in the same spot. Every control was in the same spot. And it was really, really great. When I got my first EOS R, I was still doing a full 1080 workflow. And then, I don't know, maybe after about a year of having it, maybe less than a year, is when I started upscaling footage to 4K. Of course, the R does do 4K, but it's cropped 4K. So that is super helpful when you're doing B-roll of like products. So if I were making a video about this ENG camera and I turned on the EOS R's cropped 4K, it would punch into like the controls and stuff so you could see them even more clearly. Plus it's 4K. I think the 4K quality on the EOS R is really great. It just has that crop on it. I do have the Metabone speed booster, which takes the 1.7 times crop and reduces it to like a 1.2 times crop. That really does help, but it also degrades autofocus performance. It's a whole thing. But fortunately, and this makes sense now, because the file size coming out of the EOS R for 1080 footage is almost the exact same as the file size coming out of the Sony a7S III for 4K footage. And I know that sounds crazy, but like, after I record a video, say I record a talking head part for a video, I import my Sony footage, and it's, I say 23 gigabytes of that one talking head shot. And then I take my EOS R, which was a B camera, import that footage. It's like 22 gigabytes. Which the EOS R has really high quality 1080 footage, and it scales up very well to 4K. Basically, since May of this year, when I got the Sony, you've been seeing full resolution native 4K from the Sony mixed in with EOS R 1080 footage, and nobody has ever said anything about it. So it scales up very well. It's definitely not the same. Like, you can, if you're doing a side-by-side comparison, you can totally tell a difference between the Sony and the EOS R. But the EOS R is a really good camera. I do love it a lot. We've talked about that. Having two of them was great. And then I got my Sony, and things changed. There's a whole, if you want to go through that whole story from earlier 2021, so this would be the tail end of season 4 of this podcast, there's a couple episodes called like My Camera Conundrum. I think I called it Cameronundrum. And you can go and sort of see, like, I dive through the whole process of, basically what I wanted was full frame 4K. I was at the point where that was important to me, and I wanted that from Canon, and I couldn't get it in the way that I wanted it from Canon. And I tried out Blackmagic. I looked at every other option. I looked at Fuji cameras. I looked at Panasonic. I looked at everything. Ended up with I actually ordered the R6, but canceled it before it shipped. And then So I pre-ordered the R5 when it was announced, canceled it, and then ordered the R6 before I got the Sony, but then canceled that, and then just got the Sony. What it really reminds me of, if you're somebody who watched King of the Hill, there is an episode where Hank needs to get a new truck. He has like an old Ford Ranger pickup truck, and it's been with him for the whole series, and it's just starting to break down, and he's like super attached to this truck, and he loves it, and he wants to keep it going, but it's like it's just at the end. And so Bobby, his son, I feel so weird explaining shows if you've seen them, but anyway, his son Bobby like wants him to get a new truck. Well, actually, sort of like accidentally, he sees an ad for a place to like repair pickup trucks and makes an appointment and like gives his dad all this false hope, and they go and they realize it's just a car dealership, because they're like, the thing that would really fix your new truck is a new truck. And Hank is super upset about that, and they leave, and it starts raining, and the car stalls on train tracks. They get out, but the car gets hit by a train and destroyed, or the truck does, and Hank gets really mad at Bobby, and it's your fault. Like that, if I only drove that truck for like 10 miles a year, I could have had it for another 100 years, like kind of thing. And Bobby runs off into like the rain and the dark, and Hank doesn't know what to do. So he goes to search after him. He gets a pickup truck from the dealer, and says like, yeah, I want to take this truck on a test drive, and like goes out just to find his son. And throughout the test drive, in the rain and the mud and all these conditions, he's like slowly discovering how much he loves this truck. It's super comfortable. It's got like better four-wheel drive. It's got better brakes. It's got little, mud splashes up on the headlights, and it's got little wipers to wipe it off. It's, he eventually finds Bobby, who's cold and wet, and he gets in the truck, and there's like heated seats to keep him warm. Like, as he uses the truck more, he discovers that he loves it, and then he ends up buying the new truck. That is what I think of so much with the Sony camera, the A7S III, because I was so like, no, I want to stick with Canon because that's what I've been with. That's what I love. I know like it's not perfect for me right now, but down the line, I have faith they're going to do something great that is going to be perfect for me. The words "for me" being very key there, because that, your workflow different than my workflow. So, and again, being very nitpicky, because all cameras are pretty great. So you can't buy a bad camera these days, but if you want to find like the one that really fits in perfectly, it's like, okay, this Sony, the whole world of people I hear saying Sony cameras are great, they can't all be wrong. And Sony has a good reputation, as I just showed with my ENG camera, of making really good pro level stuff. So I got this camera, and I remember when I first got the A7S III, I was like, yeah, it's a nice camera. But what it really did was show me how good the EOS R was, because I actually didn't think it was like, I was like, yeah, I don't know if it's like worth more than twice the cost of the EOS R. Like, the autofocus is better, image quality is nice, but I don't know. And then as I used it more and more, it's like all these little things would happen where I was like, oh, this is really nice. Oh, no record limit. Oh, 4K 120, super good stabilization, like easy way to do presets with menus and stuff. Amazing autofocus. And it's like almost telling me this, like the EOS R stopped being better at autofocus, because typically I'll have it as a B camera, and it's like there have been so many times where, I guess because I'm not facing the camera directly, it like totally just goes out of focus. And so I will have a 20 to 25 minute long shot that is my B camera that's completely unusable because it's out of focus. Whereas like even the newer Canons will, like, if it locks on your eye and you turn your head to them, it will still stay locked on your head, or you put a helmet on or something. But the autofocus stopped being as reliable as it used to be, and the Sony's is crazy reliable. And just all the little things, like I can charge it through USB, I can power it through USB, it's full-size HDMI, like all of these little things just started popping up in the Sony where I was like, it's really good. And the more that I started using it, the more, like lately, I think I talked about this last week, but I've gotten people leaving comments that are like, hey, did you do something different with your camera? Like everything's looking extra crispy lately. And I'm like, no, nothing, gear-wise, nothing has changed, but like I think I'm just getting the hang of shooting with this camera, editing with this camera, and I'm liking it more and more. And it's gotten to the point, I don't even shoot in log or anything, but I guess I do use the 10-bit stuff, which I didn't really care about before, but I've noticed like, oh, when it comes to, just adjusting some of the exposure, some of the colors. Even not in a log profile, the 10-bit colors are so much easier to work with and let you do so much more. And then when I bring the EOS R footage, it is much more like, if I nailed it in camera, like the exposure and the colors, it's fine. But if I made any kind of mistake, it's like really hard to kind of pull it back. And I don't know, I'm getting the results that I want more out of the Sony. And I say that with a sigh, because last week we talked about, like, I love the EOS R, and I'm aware a lot of people have made their gear decisions based on me and my input. And again, that's why I'm like holding it. See, I still have and use my EOS R right here. And if I'm doing something that's purely photo based, for the most part, the EOS R is still the camera that I'm going to pick up. This one's in a small rig cage. But this is my first, this specific one is my first EOS R. The one I've had the longest. The one I sold was my B camera, which really was like, I don't think that camera had ever even been outside. So it was in really, really good shape. This one has like traveled with me, still in perfect shape, but I'm way too sentimental about it to get rid of it. Plus, there's some things I do really like about it, some things it does do better than the Sony. It is a really good stills camera, and it is nice to have that foot, a little toe at least, still in the Canon world, because with the EOS R, I do have, of course, the EF to RF adapter. The only RF lens that I own is the 50mm 1.8, which is such a good lens. So if you have an R series camera and you don't have the 51.8, that's like their, I think it's $180, $200 lens. It's so good. I have a full review on this. It's so crazy sharp. There's slight chromatic aberration at like f1.8 sometimes, but a lot of software can get rid of that. Hasn't been an issue for me. I love this lens. This is pretty much what I'm always using as my B camera that's off to the side, so you can see that there. I do have also, this is kind of neat, I have oh man, I don't even remember what mount this is. Whatever came before the EF mount, so back in like the 70s and the 80s, I have an adapter for that mount to the EF mount, so I can take, like, I have lenses from my grandpa's old cameras. This is like a 50mm 1.8, but it's from the 80s, I think. And I have some zoom lenses too, like from the 70s, that I can mount on here, and they're EF, and then I can put them on the EF to RF adapter and mount them on the EOS R, which looks strange because these lenses are not made for that high resolution stuff, but it's kind of cool. So I can use these old lenses with the Canon. I've still got my Sigma 24 1.4, which is an amazing lens. And then I've got my Canon 24 to 105, crazy versatile lens. Like, it's an f4 lens, but beyond that, like, I mean, f4 lenses are fine. If you're shooting indoors or low light or something, it might not be ideal. But beyond that, it's amazing. And when I use the Metabone Speed Booster with it, it makes it like what does it make it? A 2.8 lens, the kind of equivalent in terms of light. So that's pretty fun. I really love this lens. It was the first L lens that I bought. And I do have the Sigma MC11 adapter, so I can use all of, well, not the EOS R, but I can use the EF lenses with the Sony camera. So I could even use this old 1980s or my 1970s lenses with my Sony camera. However, the Canon lenses with the Sigma adapter on the Sony will have autofocus in photo mode, but they won't have autofocus in video mode. So they're manual focus only. I've mainly been using them, especially the 105 for B-roll shots. So manual focus has been fine. Sometimes I just want to like really zoom in and get almost like a macro style shot of something. I'll put that lens on the Sony. But the Sigma lens, the 24mm with the Sigma adapter, will have autofocus on the Sony, and it's pretty much just as good as native autofocus. This lens is just louder than the other lens. I didn't realize that till I started using it again. I was like, what's that clicking sound? Oh my gosh, it's the lens. So I have those. Now you might be noticing something's missing. I also, along with my EOS R, I did sell my Canon 16 to 35 f4. It made me so sad. I hate, like, I had to ship those things off yesterday, and I was like, I walked out of the UPS store and I was like, like, am I still like, I don't know. I'm a weirdo who like assigns, it's like Toy Story, like I assign emotions and things to my inanimate objects, which, like, I understand is not something I need to do, but it's something that I do. And I just felt so bad. But ultimately I was like, it's so much better if these things are going to go somewhere where they're going to get used, rather than, like, especially the Canon lens is a great lens. I just bought it when I thought I was going to be doing a lot more like vlog style stuff and whatever. And it's like, I didn't do that. I never really used it. If I'm using the f4 lens, it's probably going to be a 24 to 105, because in general, I would rather push in further than get wider, typically. So, and then as we mentioned last week, I got the Surui anamorphic lens and the Batis 85 1.8, both for the Sony. And it didn't even occur to me when I was lens shopping to even check on Canon lenses. I had 2 Canon cameras, 1 Sony camera, didn't even consider a Canon lens. And that really showed me like, okay, much like the truck for Hank Hill, the Sony camera for me has like, there have been Sony fans. And that's kind of honestly what kept me away from the system for so long, is because not just that people were fans of it, that's great. But a lot of people, especially online, were like kind of aggressive about it. Like, almost like a superiority thing because of the camera brand that you use, which is silly, no matter what brand you use. And it was like, you know, you could ask any question. Hey, you know, I'm looking for this kind of lens for my EOS R. Does anyone know about this accessory for my Nikon, Canon, whatever? And people are just gonna be like, just get a Sony, like just get. And it's like, like I don't want one just because of you. It's nothing to even do with the camera. And so getting one and having it over like what, May, June, July, August, September, October, over like 6+ months, really like earn my affection, which that sounds so terrible and manipulative and weird, but like it has earned my adoration, rightfully so, because it's been such a great performing camera, and I love using this camera, the A7S III. It's so much fun, and so I thought, okay, you know what? Also, since having the Sony and the 2 Canons, that meant I had a 3-camera workflow for a lot of stuff. And I know that seems excessive, but that was oh my gosh, like, I don't want to not have that anymore. It's really, really good. And so I thought, okay, what I'd really like to do then is, since I do a lot of A camera, B camera stuff, I'd really love it if this B camera could be another full frame 4K camera. I've got these other Sony lenses now, so I could I can bring in another Sony camera because I've now got the lenses and stuff for it. And that, oh my God, that went through a whole thing. I went from everything to like, I'm going to look at the Sony FX3, like a big cinema camera, all the way to like, what about the ZV-E10, like their cheapest interchangeable lens camera, and everything in between, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do here. And so sold the EOS R and stuff so I could put that money towards a new Sony camera. And just admit to myself that, like, at this point, I have made that leap to the land of Sony. I didn't even tell you my crazy ENG news story. We'll do that at the end. Sorry, I'm going to leave this here as a reminder. That's my tease. I don't mean to bury the lead, as they say in the biz. But anyway, yeah. So I was trying to think. I basically literally like looked at every Sony camera and was like, what can I axe out as not being an option for a second camera? I really did think, okay, the ZV-E10 seems awesome. It's super affordable, but I know myself enough to know that, like, I really want a full frame camera. And for the price, I don't think I would have regretted getting the ZV-E10 because it's so good for the price, and it really is an amazing camera. But I also like have been doing this long enough now to finally learn, like, if there's a part of me that's saying, but I really want the full frame one, just even if it means waiting longer or something, like just wait, save, be patient, get the full frame one. Okay, so I was looking at Sony's full frame options. There are things like the FX3 and stuff, which is just beyond, it would be fun to have like a big, say have a big body, to have like, you know, it's not an ENG style camera, but it has a lot of things like my ENG camera where there's, you know, physical switches and you really can like get in and have total control over every part of the camera. And when you see a camera that's designed to be used super professionally like that, you really see how it's designed not to fail in a bunch of ways. Not that my A7S III has ever failed me, or my EOS R for that matter. But I thought that'd be really fun. But that's like a $6,000 camera. It's like, okay, I'm not spending that much money on a camera. There's the A7R series cameras, but those are primarily photo first cameras, so I just eliminated those. There's the A7 III, the one from a few years ago, which is pretty affordable now, but it's like, I don't know if I would, if I still had that and I loved it, it'd be great, but I don't know if I'm going to buy like a brand new one today because there's just too many other options out there. there's the A7C, which is the A7 III in a different body, but it has a flip out screen. I think better menus, better autofocus. Maybe it doesn't have the better menus. Anyway, it's like, oh, that could be a reasonable choice. And there's also the A7 IV, which it was kind of like if I was going to choose between the C and the 4, I would have preferred the 4, which is like barely just coming out now. And I know it's like pre-order, back-order land. And that seems like a great camera, but it is missing a few things. 4K 120, which I wouldn't have expected, has become a huge part of my workflow because you take 4K 120 footage for like B-roll clips and mix it especially with like software stabilization, and you almost like don't need a slider. It's kind of amazing the types of shots that I can get that I could not have rigged, that either would have taken forever to rig up on something like a slider or some kind of jib, and I can just do them handheld now. It's changed kind of everything, and I know I have that in the Sony a7S III, so I don't have to have it in a second camera, but I also know what was really nice with having two EOS Rs was if I was making something, I could just grab whichever camera was closest and film something with it. So if I needed a shot, it's like just pick one up and film with it. It's going to be the same quality, or have different lens on each camera and do that. I know I would get annoyed if I was like, okay, I need a 4K thing. Oh, wait, this is the A7 IV. It doesn't do that. Okay, I need to take my A7S III off the tripod. Like, I knew that was just going to kind of like annoy me enough. And there are a few frame rates and things, which I don't think would be a huge deal for me, but they do have a crop when you use them. If I'm moving on from the EOS R, let's just stay away from crops. Let's just stay away from it. And even though it can be beneficial on the EOS R from time to time, I'll admit. The big plus to the A7 IV, though, was that it is higher resolution, which does give it some of those video problems. That's why it has pretty bad rolling shutter. That's why it does need to crop in so it doesn't overheat on stuff, but it also makes it a better camera for still photos. And I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool because, then it'd have the A7S III, which is good for photos, but it's not like, if you're going on a photo tour, it's not the camera to grab. And then the A7 IV could be. But then I just saw myself, like, I knew, like, say I was going to go somewhere and do something, I would be sitting there going, oh, do I take the A7S III? Do I take the A7S IV? What do I do? And so ultimately I stumbled on, I will get a second A7S III. But then the FX3 was also there as an option. And when I bought my A7S III, I did get a number of people asking, why didn't you get the FX3? Why not the FX3? And if you don't know, they're the exact same camera. It's the same camera in a different body. So image quality wise, menu wise, feature wise, like they're identical. The difference is just the body. The A7S III has an electronic viewfinder. The FX3 doesn't, but it comes with like an XLR top handle thing. It's got a fan. Not that the A7S III has ever overheated or come close to it for me. The FX3 has tally lights, and it's sort of a different form factor with different mounting points. And it's the same camera, just in a different form factor. And part of me thought like, oh, Sony calls it part of their cinema line. Even, I don't know. There's all a marketing controversy over whether that's true or not. But so I was stuck in this thing where I was like, getting a second A7S III would be great, because then I know I love the camera. I have two of the exact same. And literally with Sony, I'm sure you could do this with other companies, but with Sony, you can copy your settings to a memory card, put it in another one of that camera, and then basically clone it. So all of my customizations and things could instantly be on another camera instead of me going like page by page, trying to match things up so the cameras work a certain way, because the FX3 and the A7S III, their button layouts are very different. So that wouldn't work. But ultimately it was two things, which was one, the tally lights are kind of a big selling point for me. If somebody could make like an accessory that goes in like a camera's hot shoe and is just a tally light, just a red light that turns on when the camera's recording, that would be awesome. Because as much as I love that on Sony cameras you can emphasize the display when it's recording, it'll have a red border that goes around the display. There have been a number of times where I've forgotten to flip out the display so I can see it, because I'm usually monitoring my camera on my computer through like Ecamm Live. And so the display is still flipped to the back of the camera. And then I'm 20 minutes into a take and I'm like, oh my God, is the camera actually recording? Which fortunately it pretty much always is, but there have been a couple times where it's not, and I didn't notice. So being able to just see a red light, or especially if it's not the main camera, but a camera that's off to the side. And especially if I were ever doing like projects out in the world again, where like I'm monitoring one camera and there's another camera that I'm not monitoring that's just set up, being able to glance over and see that it's recording from a distance. Tally lights are huge. If that little accessory shoe tally light idea, if that exists, please tell me about it. If it doesn't exist, please make it and send me one. So I just kind of thought, like, as nice as it would be to have two of the exact same camera, since fundamentally they're the same, so they're going to match. If I have the picture profile set the same and all those settings, the footage is going to be identical between them. But having just sort of like some different options is kind of cool. I know the top handle on the FX3 with the XLR ports, sort of controversial because it's a little like ergonomically weird, and it's also kind of plasticky and stuff. I don't have the camera yet, so I can't give you my personal opinion on it. But I know those are points that have been brought up. And it's not like I run an XLR microphone into my camera very often. However, that's because I can't. But I started thinking like, wow, again, going out into the world at some point in the future, it could be a helpful thing to do. But even here, like Sennheiser lent me I can't reach it, but it's the MKH50, which is a really amazing, they let me borrow it. I don't get to keep it. It's a really amazing, oh my gosh, I'm going to sneeze. And I'm better now. The MKH50 is a what is it, like a super cardioid? It's a super directional shotgun mic that's used a lot in movies and TV shows for dialogue, because you really can, probably more so than many shotgun mics, position it out of frame and like really focus in on specific sound or a specific sound source. And so being able to plug that directly into a camera, since it's a condenser mic and I can just run it off phantom power, would be cool, because then I don't have to put it into the Rodecaster and then sync the audio in editing, which isn't a huge step, but not having to do that would be amazing. There have definitely been times where I've run two microphone setups, like an XLR mic and then also my video mic NTG into the camera. And then I'm listening to them before I edit, and I'm like, well, the XLR mic sounds better, but the video mic is already synced, so I'll just use that audio. That's definitely happened before. And, you know, being able to just connect something straight to the camera, you wouldn't be able to run like the SM7B or something off of it, but condenser microphones or anything that runs off phantom power, you totally could. And that could be some really cool versatility to have built in there. So I thought that might be kind of nice. And even though they're not going to be the exact same physical layouts, the same image quality, the same, you know, internals, with the best of both worlds for the externals would be cool. And then also, you can't buy cameras anymore because everything is sold out. So A7S III is back ordered literally everywhere I could find, both locally, online, everywhere, until 2022, like well into next year. It's back ordered. And the FX3 pretty much is as well, but I did see it pop up on a retailer from the Midwest, which every once in a while, I learned this through Canon Price Watch, which I did a video on. They have a street deal program where they'll say like, hey, you can get this camera, you can get an EOS R for $1,500. And then if you inquire about that, they basically can't publish. I did a whole video about this. It's not a scammy thing at all, but they connect you with a Canon authorized reseller, and then they give you the EOS R will be $1,500 with, you know, free shipping or whatever. And then if you accept the deal, then you pay them for it. So you get to know what you're getting, where you're getting it from, all that before you pay, but you have to like inquire before you know that. I've done that a few times, and through that I've learned about some other retailers I didn't know about. So, you know, go to B&H or Autorama and they're sold out of something. You can go to like Procam, which is based, I think, in the Chicago area. I got the EOS R that I just sold yesterday came from Procam. They're great. And sometimes they have other things. You go to Sammy's Camera. They're amazing. So it kind of like opened me up to, usually if I'm spending a decent chunk of money on something, I want to buy it from B&H, or, you know, if it's a computer, I'm going to buy it from Apple or something. But, you know, if you look up the reviews of retailers, or you reach out to them via like phone or email beforehand and talk to them a little bit, there are other options out there. So, I found it at Full Compass Systems, which is in Wisconsin. And I'm not endorsing, I haven't gotten the camera yet. So let's wait and see how that all works out before I say yes or no. But I bring that up because it was in stock and it was available. And they were like, yeah, the A7S III is not coming until next year, but the FX3 is here and ready to go. So so I ordered it from them, and we shall see. So the fact that the A7S III wasn't even available, I really like the A7S III. And I actually really like the body and the form factor and the button layout and everything. So that's why I was very much like, I really like this camera. Maybe I should just get another one of these. But I think it would be good to branch out a little bit and try something else. So that's the story here. And since this is the season finale, if you want to keep updated with that, you might see something on my channel, but you also like Instagram is probably a good place. I'm sure I'll post something or do a story or something there if you want to know about the FX3 when it gets here. So to wrap up the season, I forgot to tell you my goofy story, which was half the reason I even told you about the ENG camera in the first place. So let's wrap up with story time. Okay, this was in 2002, early 2002. I was 16 years old. I was 16 years old, working at the TV station as an intern. I had been there for over a year at this point, maybe a year and a half. And last week I mentioned that during the week, I would oftentimes intern with like these really, really awesome photographers, like the person I met up with last summer. But during the weekend, I interned with someone who wasn't the best photographer, and he definitely didn't follow all the station rules, but I was like a little too naive to know that. It was kind of like, he's here. I know his footage looks bad, but like, he must know what he's doing. I'm 17. What would I know? And one of the things he would do is that when we would come in to go out, shooting for the day, you go in the equipment room and all of these big cameras are there. And I left it on the whole time. And all of these big cameras are there, and you check out the camera that you're going to take and the batteries or the bag or whatever, which this thing also came with an amazing, like probably the coolest, most heavy dutyest camera bag I've ever seen. That's super cool too. So you can check out your stuff. Interns are not supposed to have their own equipment. They're really technically not even supposed to like use the equipment, but basically every photographer, at least me, maybe I'm trustworthy, they would let me use it like under supervision, so I could like get shots, film stuff, do interviews, set stuff up. Because it's like, how else are you going to learn if you're not actually using it? And so what this one photographer would do is every so often he would just grab two cameras because it was Saturday. I think there were like two photographers working on Saturday. So all the cameras are there and available. He would just grab two, and one for me, one for him, and we would go out filming, and I got to be like the second shooter for the day. I loved that because I got to work with one of these cameras, and it felt like, oh, this is like my camera that I'm setting up. Every shot on the tape is my shot. I don't have to everything here is mine. It's really cool. And so one day we were going to a local golf cart parade. So this was one of the non-gory, violent things that you film. I live in the Coachella Valley in California, which is a community that's huge on resorts and golfing. And so every year there's a very big golf cart parade, which like people go nuts setting, like it's very fancy people on very fancy golf carts that are then like decorated like floats and stuff. And there's a parade down like one of the main streets in the area. And that was happening that day, and we needed to cover it. So, okay, we're going to the golf cart parade. That's awesome. That's such an easy thing to cover because it's fun, it's lighthearted, everybody's in a good mood, there's really cool visuals, it's, there's no stakes, like nobody's life's at risk or anything. Keeping in mind, this is 2002, I didn't have a cell phone yet, so like, that's going to be important. We get in the news van, we park at the news truck, we park at the golf cart parade, we get out, and what the photographer says to me is he goes like, okay, I'm going to go down to that end of the street and film over there. You go down to that end of the street, start filming over there, and we'll meet in the middle. It's like, awesome. I've never gotten to like just leave on my own with one of these cameras. So I had the camera, which was like, I don't know, $30,000 camera that I was walking around with. I was filming stuff. I think if I remember right, I was also carrying a giant heavy duty tripod, because something I forgot to mention about this camera is there is like a 1/4-20 mount on the bottom, but there's a big plate on like the tripod mount is just built into the camera. Like the camera itself is the tripod mount, and you get these plates called VCT plates, which can go on basically regular heavy duty tripods. because you don't want to do it on a lightweight tripod. But you put it on a heavy duty tripod. Basically, the camera itself just clicks into it. And then when you're done, there's just a switch and the camera comes out. So you can super quickly put the camera on and off the tripod. There's no plates that you're messing with on the bottom of the camera. You still have access to the shoulder pad when you put it on a shoulder. But it's heavy. Those tripods are heavy. And the camera itself is super heavy. And I was like 114 pounds at the time. I did this thing where I was like chubby for most of my school, like most of elementary school and all of middle school. I was chubby and I got made fun of for being fat. And then between the 8th and 9th grade, when I went to high school, I lost weight. And then in 9th grade, I started getting made fun of for being too skinny. So the same people who were calling me like Fat Albert and all these like fun names were then calling me like anorexic the next year. And I was like, what do you want from me? Like, which is it? But anyway, at this time, I was like 114 pounds, just this high school kid with like probably 114 pounds worth of gear that I was trying to carry up and down this street. But it was so much fun. You know, like as soon as people see even if I took this big camera out right now, this standard definition, like 480p camera and started filming, people would be like, what's that guy doing with that camera? Like, it's just going to get attention, even though your phone takes better footage. It's just the way that it is. And that's kind of fun. It's kind of fun when you're 16 and you're like, wow, look, like people are interested in what I'm doing. I'm doing something neat. And then also like I actually get to use the camera. I didn't feel stressed like someone was watching me. Like every time I got to like really spend more time composing my shots, figuring stuff out, you know, like talking to people, like experimenting with the camera in ways that I hadn't got to do before just because I wasn't comfortable or I wasn't able to. And so I was having a great time going down the parade route a little bit, got to the halfway point. Didn't see the photographer. Went a little further, didn't see him. It's like, I'm going to go back to the truck then. Went to the truck and the truck was gone. And I was like, oh, okay. He left. He just left. That's cool. And I had that feeling of like just like my stomach dropped out, like just total anxiety of, okay, I'm not even supposed to be touching a camera, and now I'm like stranded here alone with this camera. Like I'm gonna get in trouble. This is gonna be really bad. This is terrible. Oh my god. And so I was like, okay, I'll just wait. And I really looked and didn't see anything, and he wasn't coming back. No cell phone. This would have been a very easy problem in today's world to just send a text, be like, hey man, where'd you go? Actually, it wouldn't have even happened because before he left, he would have just called me or texted me. This was not the case back then. So I had to go into a restaurant and ask to use their phone, which is like the nearest business or whatever that I saw. I just went in, and because I had like the camera and the thing, they let me do whatever I want. So I called the TV station, which I knew their number, and I was like, "Hey, this is Tom. Could you give me so-and-so's number?" And they were like, "Yeah, no problem. Why do you need it though? Aren't you with him?" And I was like, I just need his number. I don't remember what I said, but I very poorly weaseled my way. I clearly didn't weasel my way out of that because why else would I need the number? So they gave me his number. I called him. He was driving somewhere and he's like, where are you at? And I was like, I'm at the freaking golf cart parade. Like, where else would I be? This is where you left me? And he was like, okay, don't go anywhere. I'll come back for you. And then like 20 minutes later, he pulled up and picked me up. And he was like, I was out filming, and then they called me because there was a fire, and I had to go cover the fire, and I didn't know where you were, so I just left. The golf cart parade was about 20 minutes from the TV station. The fire that he went to film was like 30 minutes from the TV. Like none of these things were close together, and so he came back. I guess he didn't actually get to the fire. He came back before. I don't think because he cared about me, but I think he remembered like, oh yeah, that guy has a camera that I'm responsible for. I should go back there. And I was like, yeah, I got footage and everything. He was like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. That's cool. Let's go. And we were going back and he was like, okay, we're not going to make it. Like there wasn't enough time now to like go cover the thing and go back to the TV station. And so what he did was he took the tape out of his camera, and it was one of these tapes, these DVC Pro tapes, or these DV cam tapes, and he like opened it. I don't know. I don't want to break this tape. Whatever. You know how you open a tape and you can see the thing. And he was driving the car, and then with the other hand he held up the tape and he was like, okay, pull this. And I like he's like, no, he didn't say pull it. He said, grab that. So I grabbed the tape, and then he just went and like ripped the thing so that I had the tape there. And he's like, okay, so the camera ate the tape, and we weren't able to get the footage from the fire and stuff. So we don't have that footage because the camera ate the tape, and there's a problem with the camera. And I was like, oh, I don't like this at all. This feels bad. But of course, I was 16 and he was the person in charge. So I just said, okay. And then I literally the rest of the day, it was just this mix of like tunnel vision and guilt and fear. We got back to the TV station. The good part was all of my footage from the golf cart parade is what we had to use because he ruined his tape with all of his footage on it. So that was kind of cool. I got a bunch of footage on the news that night. And then, of course, we didn't get to edit. We didn't get to cover the thing. And what I remember was like, we got back to the TV station and that guy, I don't know what was going on with his experience at the TV station. I think he had already gotten like some warnings or something about like kind of being bad at his job. And now this had happened. And so he walked in with like this bravado of like head up, chest out, like boom, boom, boom. Yeah, camera's broken. Hey, my tape, we couldn't do the thing. Like it was a whole Academy Award winning performance. And I was just there like silent behind him, didn't know what to do. And then we went into an editing bay. And one of the other editors came in, and I remember this editor, he was in like his early 20s, and he was like, yo, are you guys high? I was like, what? And he was like, are you guys high? What are you doing? You come in here all like, your tape's broken, you're acting all weird, like whatever. And I was like, I've never done drugs. Like no, I'm not high. I was like, so like, I took my internship or my job, whatever you want to call it, really seriously. And I wanted to do a good job. And I thought I had been doing a good job for a long time. I'd been dedicating unpaid time to something like, no, I'm not somebody who's going to go like do drugs on the job. I don't want to be damaging equipment. Like ultimately it came down to like this guy abandoned, like it's frustration, right? But I couldn't say any of those things. I'm not going to throw this guy under the bus. I don't really know. Nothing ever actually happened. Like it didn't become an issue because it was just like the weekend broadcast. Nobody cared. We didn't really miss anything. The fire that happened was like a brush fire. It wasn't like, anything that anyone even cared to know about. It was like the fire department put out a brush fire today because that's their job. The end. So that wasn't actually even that big of a deal, but it was just like terrifying. And I wouldn't have, had that been now, like if you put me in that situation now, it's not what would have happened. I would not have destroyed a tape. I would not have I would have just called someone out on what they're doing or found a solution of like, well, I'll go back and do this and then you go film that. Like, there's solutions that involve not just destroying everything. And that's what I would have done. But when you're 16 and this kind of thing has never happened before, and I was so scared because I knew I wasn't even supposed to have a camera. That was my biggest fear, was like, you let the intern have a camera and like and then I don't know. I obviously didn't do anything wrong. I never let my hand off of the camera the whole time I had it. Like it was always, death grip. So I never let anything bad happen to it, but oh man, the terror. So that was that was one of my many TV station stories. That was the scariest one in terms of like feeling like I'm going to get in trouble and never going to be able to do this stuff again. And that sucks because I've spent a year and a half putting in a lot of hours for free to build up like a good reputation here and a lot of good skills and stuff. And I really hate the idea that that's going to go away. So that was fun. Anyway, I guess that brings us to the end of season 5. If I'm telling long stories from 20 years ago, I think the season is wrapped up. So thank you so much for listening. Of course, I appreciate it very, very much. What's going to happen now is season 5 wraps up we have the holidays coming up, and then January is going to be a weird month for me because we have kind of a busy calendar, and I have a few like family commitments that I don't want to have to juggle between like a podcast and things. So my plan is to actually come back with season 6 at the start of February, maybe sooner if things just work out that way. That would be great. But the plan is February, which feels like I'm talking about 10 years from now. but that's really actually not that far at all from now. So yeah, so there'll be a bit of a gap. That's really the biggest gap I've ever taken between seasons. So I'm a little nervous about that. But if you miss me, there's 104 other episodes of this show that you can go listen to. And if you're done with that, you can go listen to the Couples Table. If you're done with that, you can go listen to a podcast with Peter and Tom. If you're done with that, you can go listen to the Ska podcast. You got 7 episodes there to listen to. So, or you could watch like the 300 videos on my YouTube channel. So there's no shortage of Tom in your life, for better or worse, should you need that. If you do need to reach out to me, or you want want to share anything during this break, of course, you can still always send an email to tom@enthusiasmproject.com. Still check that all the time. Or you can reach out to me on social media at SwordArmTom on all the things. And of course, youtube.com/TomBuck as well. So there's that. Thank you so much to everyone, especially, YouTube channel members and Patreon, for helping support the video version of the podcast. Thank you for everyone for listening for 5 seasons, 105 episodes. That's pretty amazing and super exciting. And I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your year. I hope all the good things, and I can't wait to, talk at you again in season 6. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you next season.